Ladies and gentlemen and all genders outside and in between, welcome back to Thirsty Work, a tantalizing podcast talking about sex education in all types of dynamics. Today my guest, RollWithRu, is a glorious individual, and we're going to be talking about sex and disability. Ooh, it's thirsty work. Allow me to bring in my wonderful guest, RollWithRu. Well, hello there, you spectacular bean. How are you doing? How's it going?
Hello, I am doing absolutely wonderful. The sun is shining and that always makes me feel good. And I am good. How are you?
I'm glorious. The sun is not shining here. It is a grey and miserable day, but it makes me feel it makes me feel good in my little soul, I have to say. It does make me feel good in my little soul. It's that sort of dreary day where I can stand there and look out the window and have, it looks like tears are rolling down my face. Very like...
In a music video.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
I was thinking more like 1930s black and white cinematic. Oh, yes, you know, the monochrome.
Yeah, in like a robe.
Oh, yes. And I have many a robe.
Of course.
Of course, naturally. What else would I do? But yes, I decided that actually, do you know what, Ru? You were one of the first people that I came across when I started the podcast. All those moons ago. Yeah, because I was thinking when I was in the first stages of being like, right, I'm going to do a sex education podcast. I really want to cover certain grounds, and I had this big like chart available with scribbles all over it, and I was like, one of the things I really want to do is I want to talk about sex and disability, because it's something that isn't talked about. It's not something that's really, I mean, it's got better recently, but it's something that a lot of people don't think about, and a lot of people choose to ignore foolishly. And
Definitely.
I was looking for different people to bring on and talk to about, and that's when I discovered you and was like, oh my lord, this person is amazing. They're very confident and openly spoken about the way that they feel about things and bits and pieces and sex education. We need to get you on oh, cheeky, hitting the microphone. We need to get you on the Thirsty Work podcast. So thank you very much for agreeing to come on. I really appreciate it.
Oh no, I'm glad that we could do this, because I've been very excited, and it's exciting to have a place to talk about sex and disability rather than just sort of screaming into the void that is Twitter about it. So yeah,
the void of Twitter. Oh, what a wonderful place! What a wonderful place. Do you find? I mean, I definitely sent you a list of things we might talk about, but I'm going to go completely off the ball there. Do you find that is something that you do struggle with? Is because I'm very aware that people in general will pay attention when it suits them, and yeah, like the idea, because you do an awful lot of disability accessible stuff and talking about like places that are not accessible, or the way you've been treated as a disabled person. Do you find that it gets to a point where you don't think people are listening, despite how important the message of what you're saying is?
Definitely. And I think like social media has been a big help in that sense, because there's been so many times where I've been saying to like a company or an event, and I've been emailing them behind closed doors being like, I couldn't access this and it's really upsetting and I'd like a refund or something like that, and I'd just get no response. But then as soon as I take it to Twitter and tag this brand, and then people see it, and then the brand has to listen because people are tagging them, and only then, when it's sort of almost performative and they are held to account publicly, they'll respond, which is very frustrating in some senses, but like it does the job, it gets it done. So yeah, and then what's frustrating then is that you'll always get people commenting like, well, why are you talking about this online? Why not deal with this privately? And I'm like, I've tried.
Yeah, but that is the thing, is that the amount of places that will only be held accountable if it's publicly accountable. And that's so frustrating, because like you say, it can come across as performative. It can come across as like you're kicking up a fuss because you're in for the drama, when it's not that at all. It's like you've tried the alternative methods and this is the only one that matters. This is the only one that seems to have any kind of effect, you know? Yeah. That is outrageous. That boils. Do you know what? It's one of those things we were just talking as well a second ago about the fact that there's so many things that you don't see until it's directly in front of you. And you've been a massive influence on that. And I see that One True Cripple is in the live recording chat here, who was in our first season of Thirsty Work, talking about sex and disability as well. And it's only really since being part of this online community that, like, so many things that I have completely taken for granted have become apparent to me. And I'm like, oh my God, this is awful. We need to do something about this. We need to shake it up and what have you, and little things that you just don't think about until it's put directly in your face. Do you find that a lot, that you're opening people's eyes a lot?
I'd hope so, but I think like it's interesting because I became disabled. Like I started getting symptoms. I mean, I was born with it, but I started getting symptoms when I was about 16. So I lived like the first sort of quite crucial part of my life, my childhood, without a disability. And then suddenly at 16, I had to sort of change my entire perception as things started deteriorating. And it's that you don't think about it unless it's brought to you, or unless you have to face it like head on. And so I think that this is why I always say to like non-disabled people, you should be following disabled people, you should be following other marginalized people, because it doesn't just apply to disability, it applies to sort of any identity that's marginalized. There's so many things that you won't think about because you don't have to experience that directly. And the main way that you're going to learn about that is by listening to people that have those experiences.
Yeah, and that's the key. Listening. Oh,
yes, listening is.
Don't decide what people need. Actually pay attention to what they're saying. It might be a case like I certainly have found myself in recent years being a voice that repeats things, because I talk quite often about the fact that I am very privileged as a cisgendered white man. And as a result, that gives me a lot of privilege in so many ways. And there's an awful lot of people that will listen to me more than people like yourself who are disabled, ethnic minorities, LGBTQIA, like individuals, trans individuals. They'll listen to me more because of the fact that I'm a cisgender white man. So I try to use my privilege to listen to what these people are saying and repeat their words. Just be like, okay, guess what? These people said these things. Maybe we should pay attention, because instead of making decisions on their behalf, you know, it's
100%. And I feel like I'm the same. Like I'm, yes, disabled, yes, queer, yes, don't know what my gender is, but I'm still very privileged. I mean, I don't physically look disabled, and like that can be a hindrance, but also it can be a huge privilege to be like almost passing. So I think that again, like I do love to use my platform like almost like a megaphone for like the people in, especially in the disability community. So like trans disabled people, black disabled people that aren't always uplifted as much, because they got great things to say, better than me.
I wouldn't say better, but I would say, but specifically relevant to their situations that needs to be paid attention to. Because God damn it, the amount of people that decide that they've made the decision, this is what is best for you, and it's like, who are you to say that? Who
because it never is.
No. And I mean, this is a sex education podcast. Do you find, or have you found in your past, that has been a thing with partners, is that they've made decisions on your behalf in that regard?
Yes. So I think like when it comes to like before like sort of having sex with somebody, a lot of people will assume that I can't have sex. That's the main thing. And I guess that brings us to the whole reason of why I talk about sex and disability, because the number one question I would get asked on dating apps is, can I have sex? Like as an opener. And
not even how is your day, just straight up.
No, I had, okay, this is the worst one. This is the worst one. So everyone grab your tea.
Okay, here we go.
A junior doctor. Okay, this is what's concerning. I matched with him because I was like, oh, he's a junior doctor. Like maybe he'll be like more understanding. Boy, was I wrong. The first thing he messaged was, hello, I have a question. Can you fuck? Because if not, I would not be interested in pursuing this.
Ooh,
and
that's...
And I mean, that was my response. I was speechless. And I said, I think you better reconsider your career. And then I unmatched him.
Yeah, I mean that's actually quite civil of you to say. Actually, if I'm completely
Yeah,
honest, yeah, that's quite civil of you. Um, okay,
it
I
was not
mean,
good.
speaking of like, we're going on a bit of a tangent here because this is where my brain is going. Um,
Yeah.
Speaking medically, like, is there, what's your experience with medical people? Because I've definitely had things where met some medical professionals who are phenomenal human beings, really pay attention to the needs of their patient and what have you, and then I've heard some absolute horror stories. And I'm not somebody who needs to visit medical facilities very often, so um what has your experience been? Evidently in the dating scene, possibly less than ideal. But
Yeah, clearly. I think it's just again it comes back to things like privilege. I think because I'm white, that's been in my favor in terms of getting doctors to listen to me, but then because I'm a woman or femme presenting, uh I've had severe medical conditions written off as hormonal migraines when actually my spinal fluid was leaking from my brain. So it's very much like I think you have to learn to be a strong advocate. And that's why I feel like the disability community is so vocal, because you have to advocate so much for yourself in your own body and your own life that then you're almost like forced into this like advocacy um, in the community as well. And it sort of gives you those skills to sort of do that and to speak about that, which can be really hard. But also, yeah, I think it's you either get doctors that are really great or you get ones that are really awful, and it's very often that there's anything in between.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I always keep telling people that doctors are still human. They're still human beings, and therefore they can still be little dickheads. And they can be just as much amazing, saintly people as they can be complete and utter waste of space. So it's and it should never be a bad thing. And this goes out to all of our listeners and watchers alike. It's not a bad thing to ask for a second opinion. If there's,
Absolutely not.
and it's not an affront to that doctor. It's their responsibility to make sure that they get everything right, and they might be wrong. They might be wrong. So
And you know your body best as well.
Yeah.
You know your own body, so you're the expert.
Agreed entirely. Just don't Google every symptom, because
No.
God, the amount of times that I've done that, and it's like, oh, by the way, I should be dead. No, this is just
Yeah.
a horrific hangover of sleeping in a bush after being drunk at 14 or something. I don't know, whatever the scenario. So tell me about your specific disability, just so that we're all aware of what the situation is there.
So I have a connective tissue disorder. It's called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and it's a bit of a mouthful. So I'm going to say EDS because it's a lot easier. There's, I think, 13 different types of EDS. I have a type called hypermobile type. It causes, basically, my collagen is like stretchy, is really stretchy. So like all of my soft tissues are affected, and I get like dislocations. I get, well, quite frequent dislocations. I get regular chronic pain, like every day, chronic fatigue. It can affect your like gut, it can affect your brain, it can affect your eyes. Like it basically affects all the soft tissues in your body. And so that's why I use a wheelchair, because it helps me sort of get around and have a bit more freedom. And it also means that I have to reschedule things, which is why we've had to reschedule this episode. But I think it's a very unpredictable disability. I think people call them dynamic disabilities, where like one day you can sort of be slightly better and be more at your baseline, and then the next day you can be sort of completely bedbound and unable to move. So it's a very tough thing to live with, but I think like you do just live with it because you have to. And I don't want to be sad all the time, so I just try and adapt the world to suit me because I deserve it. I deserve to be in the world.
Wholeheartedly, could not agree more. Could not agree more. And I think that that's something that's really important to say, is that, like, as you said, you kind of live with it because you have to. The amount of people that I've met, not just with disabilities, but also like mental health conditions, also severe trauma conditions, and people turn around and go, "Oh my God, like, you're so brave. I can't believe you do this. This is amazing. You're so strong. And it's like, is it strength or is it the fact that I have no choice? Like, let's be honest about this. Like, you can't. You
just
have
to
no
do
choice.
it. Yeah.
You have to do it. You have to make the most of what you have in the situation, and you do, and that's amazing to see. It is inspirational, and I can fully understand why people are like, "Oh my god, you are so strong." But the fact of the matter is, you don't have a choice. It's that's it.
Yeah.
End of story.
You just get on with it eventually. Yeah. I think it doesn't mean it's not hard, and it is bloody hard even after like 11, 12 years of living with it. It's really fucking hard, but I think you do just adapt because we're human and that's what we do.
Yeah. And on the note that you said about like rearranging this podcast, like at the end of the day, this podcast, as much as I love it and as much as it is my little baby, it's not worth putting people through any extra stress, extra problems and bits and pieces. And I want a good quality podcast with a good quality conversation. I'm not going to get that if your disability is causing you an issue. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah, definitely.
Word to all those people out there that turn around and be like, is this still going on? Of course it's still going on. It's a disability. Give them the fucking chance a day. Jesus Christ. Anyway, I get really frustrated.
You're still in pain? Yeah.
Oh, you're still in pain after all this time? Oh, yeah. Oh. Who'd have thunk it was,
it's called chronic for a reason.
Oh, Jesus. Okay, so back to like you were saying about like dating and bits and pieces. Is that, have you found that the disability or people's perception of your disability has affected the way that they treat you?
Definitely. I think it's really difficult dating with a disability. It's difficult, and I think a lot of my past relationships, I've really struggled with the sort of like partner carer dynamic, where I've sort of had people that are able-bodied that want to look after me to a point that's damaging to me almost. And then on the flip side of that, when it comes to things like sex, there's times where I've had like a hip dislocation during sex, and it's painful, right? But like, it's also just like part of what it's like to have sex with me. So I'm used to it, but then partners can sometimes be like, oh my god, I'll stop, and then they like will be too scared to like do anything else. And like, just because sex might look slightly different for disabled people doesn't mean that it's any less valid. And this is something that I talk about quite a lot, is that like, sex is so broad. Like, it's such a broad spectrum. It's not just like the traditional heteronormative like penetration perspective of sex that is often portrayed. And disabled people, we have to get creative because our bodies, for example, dislocations, it can get in the way. So we have to be creative. We can use toys. We can even things like just literally just doing dirty talk and things like that when you're too tired or in too much pain, like counts towards like disabled sex. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily recognize that. And I think that's why people are so shocked when they're like, oh my god, disabled people have sex, because yeah, we fucking do, and it's great.
Yeah.
So I think like, yeah, and I've had people in the past where I've been like, oh, let's do this slightly rough thing, and then they'll be like, oh, but I don't want to hurt you. And I'm like, listen, I know my body, like I know what I can and can't do. So that can be frustrating. And then the other side of that is that people will be like, say disgusting like sexual comments, like things like, oh yeah, you'll be in a wheelchair when I'm through with you, and shit like that. And I'm just like, oh yeah, not great.
We will get on to that momentarily.
Yeah,
because I have no doubt that is a can of worms that needs opened and needs talked about, but it's not going to be a nice one. It's not going to be a nice one. So in regards to like the you're saying like partner versus carer side of things, that overprotective nature of it, and I suppose there's also that dynamic. My brain's going a little bit too fast here. So there's the two elements, because when you were talking about the fact of like, I know my own body, I know what I can handle and what I can't handle, etc. But I suppose there's also the element of you trust the person you're with enough to know that if something did go wrong or if something wasn't quite right, that they would stop, and that it wouldn't be a problem. Like safe words are there for a reason in like the fetish community and stuff like that. And it's like that just because you have EDS or other people with other disabilities and what have you, doesn't mean that you don't want to partake in the rough sex. It doesn't mean you don't want to have wild, passionate, roll about the floor, maybe fall off the bed, coital engagement sessions. It's just that, you know.
And I think, yeah, like what's really interesting to me, what I've found, and I would love to one day do a proper study on this because I think it's fascinating, is that so many people in the disability community are also in the kink and BDSM community. There is a huge overlap of people with chronic pain that engage in BDSM and kink. And I think it's fascinating. And for me personally, I find that it's a way of being in control of the pain in my body. And I think it's fascinating. That's like, I really do. And I've spoken to a lot of other people that are sort of like in similar, like have similar feelings towards it. And like, I just think it's something that should be studied because it's very interesting and I'd love to write about it.
Well, I was about to say, one of the things that I mean, we were talking just before we started the podcast about the fact that I run this erotic cabaret fetish night thing, and one of the things that is often commented on is how accessible it is. And I was literally just saying to you earlier, it's like when we publicized ourselves as an accessible venue, we had a couple of people in crutches come, and then we had a wheelchair, and then the last event we had 3 wheelchairs, like people coming. And it's like the amount of times that you don't see disabled people at, say, kink events and stuff like that, and then there's like almost a surprise that they're at a kink event. And it's like, is it that they're not wanting to go to kink events, or is it the fact that the kink event isn't accessible and therefore they can't? And it's that dynamic. But again, this going back to what we were saying about not seeing things unless it's in front of your face. I was not aware of the need for it until I was a streamer on Twitch, and until people in my community who have disabilities were like, oh, I'd love to come to that. What are the accessible venues? Do you have ramps everywhere? Do you do these things? And I'm like, oh, Jesus, I never even realized there was a need for it, because here's me sat in my wonderful world of obliviousness until somebody points it out to me. And it's like, oh shit, right, okay, yeah, like let's do what we can. Let's see what we can do in that regard, you know?
Definitely. And I think like it's definitely not that people don't want to go, because I mean, we've like, me and my partner have looked for like clubs or like things like that, and there's just so many where you email and you're like, are you wheelchair accessible? And they're like, no, we're up a flight of stairs. And it's like, oh, okay. But and it just feeds into that idea that disabled people don't have sex because they're not physically able to access these spaces where sex is being represented, I guess.
And it also is, I mean, I suppose it also comes down to, it's like they're not able to do it, but it also I can imagine it makes you feel not welcome.
100%. Yeah. And there'll be things where it's like, oh yeah, we have steps up to the entrance, but you can go around the back through the service entrance, and you have to go around by like all the bins and stuff, and it's horrible, and it makes you feel really small, like having to go in a separate entrance that's like really dingy and dark, and it makes you not want to go even more because you're like, well, we're just an afterthought, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I remember working with venues in the past where I've asked about accessibility. I've asked about like, okay, what's the situation here? Like, can we do these things? Right. Okay. What about wheelchair access? And they've just been like, oh, well, if somebody comes in a wheelchair, we'll just pick them up and carry them up the flight of stairs. And I'm like, do you know how demeaning you are? Like, that is.
Yeah.
Yeah. What? Like, mind blowing to me that would even be a concept. So you would just be like, yeah, don't worry, we'll just pick them up. You know, like the equivalent would be, okay, you see somebody who's shorter than you that's reaching for something, and instead of like picking it off the shelf for them or asking if they need help, you just pick them up. There you go.
Exactly. And it's the same thing with like people moving wheelchairs and like moving someone in a wheelchair without their consent and stuff like that. Wheelchairs are basically our legs. Like, my wheelchair is my legs, and so if someone's touching my wheelchair without my consent, that's touching a part of my body, and it's horrifying.
Yeah, I can imagine it is. I get flabbergasted by the way that people treat each other. But I've become more and more aware of the way that people treat people with disabilities. And it's always shocking to me. But I'm really happy that people like yourself exist who are openly turning around and being like, this is a problem. This isn't an all right situation. Here we have some issues with these venues or these places or these people or what have you. And then also on the other side of things, also turn around and going, by the way, we have sex and that's perfectly normal. It might not be the same dynamic of sex that you have, but it's still perfectly normal. And the sooner you get this round in your head, the happier everyone is. You know? Do you feel that it is going that way? Do you feel that with the advent of social media and content creation that it is progressing?
I think that it's definitely in the last, I would say, few years, there's definitely better representation. Like, I always think back to the TV show Sex Education, where they had a person in a wheelchair and they had a sort of sex scene. And I just think it was done so beautifully. And that was one of the first times where I saw sort of disabled intimacy and that be portrayed on sort of like really popular mainstream like TV. And it made me emotional because I was like, I don't see this representation. And I mean, the next step to that is showing queer disabled sex. But I mean, that's maybe too scary. I don't know. But like that sort of representation is still very limited.
Well, it's I think it's steps at a time really for a lot of the scenario. It's like the show. Oh, I don't really want to give away spoilers in case people haven't seen it, but the show The Last of Us has a very interesting episode with a homoerotic relationship or homoromantic relationship, and it's honestly one of the most beautiful pieces of TV that I've ever seen. And people are still complaining about it. People are like kicking off and being like, "Oh my god, how dare you have this level of things in front of my face?" And there's children that are seeing this, and it's like, of course there's children. There's nothing that you are seeing there that you don't see in a heteronormative dynamic on most TV shows. Why are you kicking up such a massive fuss? But again, it's that whole increasing it to like it kind of has to go through the shock value on TV. It's like step by step. Okay, here's the outrageous thing that everyone's getting freaked out by. The more we do it, the more it becomes normalized, and then it becomes steadily but surely, and it's all fine. And then the next step is queer representation with people, disabled people, and that dynamic. It's walking step by step. Oh my lordy.
And I think it does start with, well, a lot of it starts with media, because that's where we've been taught that disability is this undesirable thing, or like that disabled people don't have sex because it's not represented. And I think that the lack of representation that there is, and also the lack of teaching in sex education about disabled people, that informs society of this like skewed perception. And that's why people act this way and say, oh, can you have sex? Because they've never been exposed to it.
Yeah, no, I never even really considered that, but it makes sense. It makes sense because we do get exposed to so much. And let's be clear, it's not great in the best of times. The concept of foreplay is lost in Hollywood. So like that's a really interesting concept. Have you okay, so let's talk about your experiences in that. Your disability, because you say you were born with this with EDS, and it really came prevalent in 16 years old, which is like the height of hormones and all of that jazz. Like, what was your experience discovering that and adapting to that?
So I had my first boyfriend, who, nothing bad to say about him. He was really, really lovely, which is, I'm very lucky to have had that experience, because we got together before I became disabled, like before I sort of had severe symptoms, and we were together for a little bit afterwards. We ended up breaking up for things that were out of our control, but it was almost something that we were sort of like learning together. And obviously because those hormones and stuff were there, and because we'd had this trust sort of prior that we'd built, it was nice going through it with someone. I was very lucky. It was more after that relationship that I sort of started having struggles, I think, because I picked the wrong people, maybe. But I do think that there is a vulnerability when you're disabled, and dating or seeking partners or in a relationship. There is an added vulnerability which can be very scary, and I think that is also sort of informed by people not having enough awareness, I guess. Yeah.
In what context?
So, for example, because someone may have never been with a disabled person before, then they think that they need to act a certain way, or need to, rather than sort of like we were saying earlier, listening to someone's needs because they know best, sort of because they haven't had informative sex education, they might make assumptions or do something that someone's not okay with, things like that. And because you're disabled and you can't necessarily, say, for example, you're relying on someone, you live with someone, your partner, and you're relying on them for like things like meals and stuff like that, then it adds like another layer, which can be very, very hard. I've gone off on a tangent, but yeah.
No, it's all right. That's what the entire conversation is about. I love tangents. Tangents are great. But I suppose, okay, so does that... Oh, I had a question and it's gone. So the dynamic of, like, I suppose it really comes back to what you were saying earlier of, like, partners being like, oh no, I'm not sure, and like being overprotective. And I suppose some of that will come into that whole dynamic of the vulnerability side of things, because you are a human being who who is able to make choices for themselves, able to decide where your own boundaries are, and those boundaries should be respected. But that doesn't mean that you're not gonna like ask for help if there's something you need help for. Was that because I know that the vast majority of the human race struggle to ask for help. Was that quite a learning curve growing up with EDS and learning that it's okay to ask for help and that kind of thing?
Yeah, and I think it's something that I'm still learning. I think it's something that as humans we all sort of are learning to do every day. It's something that a lot of us have to practice, and I think especially when you're disabled and you are, there's quite a lot of times that's likely where people have made you feel like a burden, or have sort of got frustrated when you can't do something, and then it sort of can be really hurtful and can really stick with you. So I think that it's definitely something that you have to learn to do. And I'm lucky because my current relationship, my partner is also disabled, so we're kind of learning to do it together, which is nice.
That's so good. That's so great. You were streaming yesterday, and I was like sat there, and I was like, "You two are the cutest, the cutie patooties that you are."
It was cute.
Yeah, but I mean, to be honest with you, that actually became really apparent in our conversations in organizing this podcast, because every single time there was a postponement for whatever reason, situations beyond our control, and you were always, thank you so much for being so understanding. And I'm like, oh, why wouldn't I be? Like that's, my brain is just like, well, yeah, this is a situation beyond your control. Why would I ever hold that against you? But to me, it also says you've had situations a lot in the past where you've had to apologize for things that are beyond your control, and
massively,
and that blows my little mind. I mean, you know full well I've banned apologies because people apologize for just existing, and I'm just like, no, not having that at all, and I won't have it from you either, Ru. All right, situations in the future, all right. I did slip up once, I think.
And
I was like, you know how I feel about apologies. Confound thee.
Every time I go to apologize now, I feel like I hear your little voice in my head, like, don't apologize for that.
I am very glad. Yeah, okay, good. There's one thing you can take away from my existence.
No, there's definitely been, oh God, so many times. I mean, even recently, like, and it happens a lot with friends who then you find out aren't really friends, and it's really hard. It's devastating. You can lose people that like you really care about because they don't quite understand, or they get frustrated for something that's out of your control. And so that's, that can be really difficult, definitely. So I think it sticks with you.
I can imagine it does. And to be honest with you, like again, talking back to the sexual dynamic, does that happen in the sexual dynamic?
So much.
For those
like,
people that are listening to the podcast, the cringeworthy face that Rue just filled, just the absolute, it was like you just bitten into the sourest lemon. I was like, wow, this is okay. Here we go. Let's talk about this. All right.
I mean, so as I mentioned, I've dated a lot of not very nice people, and there's been so many times where I've sort of been in too much pain to have sex and things like that, and that then will get used against you, and they'll be like, well, you don't care about me, and I'll be like, well, this is not a relationship. And now I can see that, obviously. But when you're young, I think you do then feel guilty, and there'll be times where like I've been in a relationship and I've sort of not been able to go out or something where we plan to do something, and then that like someone will get shitty with me about it, and it's just, it does, I think, especially when you're like 18, 19, that sort of thing will stick with you. And that's why now 10 years later I'm still struggling with it, I guess.
Well, I mean, it's
better than I was, though.
Yeah, it's always good. Always good. It's the improve that we all like to do. But I suppose at the end of the day, it's trauma. It's traumatic to be in a position where you are, especially when it comes to intimacy, you are making yourself so vulnerable. And as you mentioned earlier, like dating as a disabled person is more vulnerable in and of itself because of the situations that you are in. To make yourself then even more vulnerable in an intimate dynamic and have that play against you, that shit, like you say, it sticks with you. But that's wild. That is really wild to me. That I don't know. Like I just despair for the human race sometimes, because I'm like, why it doesn't take much to be like, okay, yeah, this is a bad situation for them because they want to do something but they're not able to do it, and that should be like you're gonna feel guilty about that anyway, as is evident by us trying to organize.
And sad because you want to do it. So
and there is that, obviously, the dynamic. I suppose it's there's a thing called sexual non-concordance, which is where your brain and your body don't align. So a lot of the time, the examples that are used are like when somebody with a vulva is really up for sex, but they need like lubrication because their body's not providing their vulva hasn't got the signals yet, being like, okay, we're in the mood, let's go. And that's sexual non-concordance, where like there's a disconnect between what the brain is doing and what the body is doing, or what the body is doing and what the brain is doing, in some of the darker situations that can come up there. But I suppose that's also kind of like on the same spectrum of that would be what happens with people with disabilities, where it's just like, I am so game for what is about to happen, but my body is not having any of it.
So true. And I think that's such a like perfect way of explaining it. And I think, I will definitely remember that. That's a little nugget that I'll take away, because I think it's so true. Like there'll be times where like I'll be like so ready, but like I've got major like shooting pains and spasms in my leg, or for example, and it's like, well, there's no way. But I'm like, well, why do I still feel horny in this situation? Like I'm in loads of pain, Ruby. Stop it.
I mean, the only level of comparison I can have, and it is not a comparison by any stretch of imagination, is but I feel the horniest when I am the illest. When I'm full of lurgy, or I've got some kind of horrible virus, and I am just like, God, I could just, oh God, it'd be wonderful if I just, and it's I don't know.
It's weird, but it's obviously common.
That's it, friends. Put in the comments. Have you been in that similar situation? Oh wow, that's amazing. That is amazing. That's thing. I mean, so in regards to that, like. Okay, just so for my understanding and the understanding of everyone that's listening, in regards to EDS, it showed its symptoms at 16 for yourself, and then it sort of progressed. Did it just get worse and worse, or was it just like it hit all at the same time and just that was it?
It's sort of up and down, so it's sort of leveled out almost by the time I got to uni, which was when I was 20. And there's been other things over the years, like other health conditions that have been caused by my EDS that have been on top of that have sort of caused me to spend a a lot of time in bed when I've been really ill, like waiting for surgery and stuff. So that's obviously where it's been worse than my like baseline, I call it. But I think at the moment it's pretty stable, which I'm not where I want to be, but I mean it's manageable. And I think that is, I mean, I've said that earlier, I think you do just sort of manage it, and it comes in peaks and troughs really. But I don't think it's something that necessarily is degenerative. Apparently some people say that it gets better with age, but I don't believe that, because I'm yet to experience that.
Yet to experience that, but you're so youthful, who knows, it'll get fantastic in 20
well,
years
it
time.
does give you good skin, so my skin is very soft, and that's
Silver
why
linings.
I look about 17.
Yeah, all about those silver linings. That's what it's all about.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
You know, that's fantastic. The reason why I ask is I was wondering about the dynamics that you've experienced in adapting when it comes to like sex and intimacy and relationships and stuff. Was it a challenge constantly adapting? Because you say it's been a bit of a roller coaster. You have your your great days, and you have your bad days, and then you have entire periods of time where it's super shitty to go through it for yourself. Was it a challenge adapting to that?
Definitely. And I mean, I think it still is as well. Like I mentioned earlier, my partner is also disabled, and so at the moment we're navigating that together, which is good fun. But it's just something that I think is constantly adapting, because no partner is going to be the same. So like as you are with different partners, like I think even when you don't have a disability, you have to adapt to a different partner. And so I think it's just something that's almost added on to that, I guess. For me, that's kind of how I see it, I suppose.
Yeah. It's just as an extra thing, you know, it makes complete sense. Do you find that it is easier and like having a partner who is on the same level, like they understand it on a level that many other people wouldn't be able to understand it?
Massively. I think it's been like, and not even just in a sex sense, I think it's been really eye-opening to me to have someone that just gets everything. And I think what's interesting is, and I'm kind of outing myself a little bit here, but what's interesting is that I, not that long ago, maybe about a year ago, said to my partner now, who I was friends with at the time, I don't think I would date another physically disabled person, because I just feel like part of it was that I felt like I was too much work and would need a non-disabled person who could help me, again playing into that carer dynamic. Fast forward to now, and like I'm in the healthiest relationship I've been in, and I think it's because we don't have that partner carer dynamic, and it's just much more on the same level. And it's been really, really nice to sort of have that understanding, I guess. Yeah.
Do you think that is like part of that old mindset that you had is because of the way that you've been treated in relationships up until this point? That whole thing of you need a carer, you need someone who is not also physically disabled, because of that dynamic. Is that like an ingrained prejudice that society has put into your mind?
Massively. I think it was internalized ableism, 100%, which is like something that, I mean, everyone has. Is I mean, even disabled people. And I think, like, again, it comes back to representation, because I never saw like disabled relationships. And quite often disability, when it's portrayed in media, is either like really, really pitiful, and like this awful thing that like you need to be infantilized, basically, or it's fetishized. I always get caught up on that word.
Fetishized, yes.
Yes, thank you. And those two things, I mean, are even informing disabled people of their own perceptions of themselves. And I think that's what I've been learning in this current relationship, is that's, you can just throw all them out the window. And I think as well, like being online and being someone that does things online, quite often I experience those two sides of things as well whenever I post things, because I'll have people that are like, so for example, I post a picture in lingerie in my wheelchair, which I love to do because it makes me feel amazing. And it's also smashing those stereotypes that disability isn't sexy, because that is the biggest lie that anyone can tell you. So I'm just putting that out there now, that disabled
Agreed.
people are sexy. And I will either get comments that are like, this is really unsettling, like you're disabled, and like basically like saying you shouldn't be doing this because, you know, like basically you don't have the brain capacity to make these decisions for yourself, and it's really unsettling. That's a word I've had before, and I'm like, okay. And then the other side of that is the fetishizing of that, which is like, oh well, like you can't run away, or like, oh yeah, just that kind of stuff.
Went up
and
my
it's
fucking back. Then that is awful.
it's terrifying. And I mean, I've had to take down posts and block hundreds and hundreds of accounts because of things like that. It's where it gets onto like the wrong side of Twitter, and it can be really difficult, I think. And it's because of that dynamic. And I mean, I could talk about representation for hours, which I haven't been doing, because I did my dissertation on it. And I think, because I do genuinely think that it's one of the ways that society is informed is through the media that's brought to us.
It's true.
And so to have only narratives that are showing disabled people that are miserable with their lives and they hate their disability and they hate this part of them, or that are like only there to sort of like be fetishized, then of course that's what people are going to internalize. Yeah.
Of course. Well, I mean, I've talked about it for many, like being a sex educator myself. We talk about the fact that there is an entire generation of teenagers who think that the standard thing to do after a sexual situation is to come on somebody's face, because no one's told them any different. Like the sex education is so appalling. Nobody teaches intimacy. Nobody teaches respect dynamics. And so where do they go? They go and learn it from mainstream pornography that pushes that kind of dynamic. And they see movies that have got these things where it's like, oh, boom, suddenly everyone's having sex. And it's like, what about the foreplay? What about the ridiculous giggles? What about the the inopportune queef that happens and everyone has a little bit of a laugh together?
The cheeky fart.
The cheeky fart. Like it's those things that make sex so unbelievably amazing.
100%.
And it's still one of those situations where we still learn from media. No, people don't understand what, like, I was with somebody years and years ago where it was like a bit of a one night stand and they just didn't do any kind of foreplay, and I was like, what? I don't. You're taking away a lot of my fun. I'm not okay with this. I'm out. Bye. See you later. Tatty bananas. But
I always think of Cameron Diaz in The Holiday, when she says like about he says something about, oh, I don't like foreplay, and then she's like, no, she says I don't like foreplay, and he's like, you're the most interesting woman I've ever come across, or something. And it's just such a like frustrating interaction to watch, because it's just basically just dismissing this entire part of sex, and I'm like, why? You're missing out.
Easily one of the most interesting parts. Like I am flabbergasted when I find that people don't do foreplay. I'm like, how? Like, why would you deny yourself that? Why?
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
It's certainly strange to me. I'm not here to harsh on anybody's kinks. If that's not what you want to do, that's entirely fair. Neither are you, Ru. I know what you're like, but you're missing out.
Yeah.
Oh dear Lord. I mean, okay, so let's go down that little route there. The fetishization of disabled people. I feel like I talk about the fetishization of people a lot, but it's only because, I mean, I'm very much into the fetish scene, and I am also becoming more and more aware. The more people that I meet, the more social dynamics I mean of people, whether it be disability, whether it be ethnicity, whether it be gender, the more I am finding out about the darker side of the subject that I hold so dear. Is it as bad as I think it is? Is it as bad as I would suspect it to be?
Yeah. I don't know. I'd probably say worse. It's awful. I think the main thing for me is that majority of the time when I see my disabled friends who are also content creators, who work on sex education, who will post pictures in lingerie, things like that, basically the majority of time I see disabled people being fetishized, it's without their consent. And I think that's the main thing for me
Consent.
that I find really hard. Yeah.
I think one of the things that I've definitely found out about fetishization, and I genuinely wish it had a different word, because it kind of makes it feel like it makes it associated with fetish, which fetish is a wonderful thing, because
100%.
consent is the forefront of the BDSM community.
Massively.
Consent is the forefront of the fetish community. Is the fact that fetishizations of people, like with yourself with disability, like people with race and stuff like that, it starts with lack of consent. And a lot of the fetishizations that you've talked about today, you can't run away. Oh, by the time I'm finished with you, you'll be in a wheelchair. That stuff is disgusting. And like you say, it preys upon that dynamic of lack of consent.
Massively, which is terrifying. And again, like, I think because we're not taught comprehensive sex education, you don't know if these things are like right or if they're normal, or like, yeah, you may feel uncomfortable by it, but you may be like, okay, well, this is just flirting. And then you look back and you're like, oh, it's definitely not. It's much darker than that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it completely is. And okay, so what I don't really want to go too dark on this, but what are people's reactions to the fetishization of, like yourself with, or people in general with disabilities? Is it generally a consensus of this is disgusting, this is horrible, why would you say something like that? Or is it a consensus of oh, I didn't realize that this is how people spoke to people with disabilities?
I think it's a combination, because I think a lot of the time when I will sort of talk about it, people will be like, oh my God, I had no idea that this was going on. And then followed by that is outrage and disgust. And I think it is. And then you will also get people commenting like, well, you posted your body online, so you basically deserve this. And I think it's obviously far too complicated for these people to understand that say these things. It's far too complex, apparently. But I think it's just because you post a picture on your social media online doesn't mean that anyone else is entitled to say these horrible things about you. I mean, and then people will be like, oh, well, it's social media, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, but this goes against guidelines. So yeah, I think it's definitely hard being a creator with a disability online. But I think my main thing is that I just carry on out of spite, I guess.
And I'm glad for one that you do, because as much as this is horrific, and I was going to say for lack of a better word, but I don't think there is a better word. I think it is horrific that people feel that they can say this way. But the messages that you do put out there about accessibility, about inherent ableism in the system, about the fact that disabled people have sex and they have a wonderful time doing so, and that is perfectly okay, really is so beneficial to so many people. So thank you very much for doing that. And
thank you so much.
Taught me a lot. Generally, have you found that like stepping away from the much darker side of fetishization, like of random anonymous individuals on the internet, have you found that in the past with partners that you've like had, or that people have wanted to get with you because of your disability as opposed to because you're a phenomenal, glorious individual?
I don't think I've had that, no, which I'm quite lucky. I mean, a lot of my partners, it's rare that I meet someone through dating apps, purely because they're really difficult to navigate when you're disabled. And I think that it's almost been, I've got with people because they've wanted to get with me, and then they've learned about disability through me. That's more my experience, which I guess is quite lucky. So
no, that's great. Yeah. Completely not, because I like I said, the more people I speak to, the more I realize that there are people that are like, there's some really, I don't really want to say evil, but I will say like self-centered individuals out there who have a tick list, and they're like, okay, they're like, here's my tick list of sexual conquests, and that dynamic of being like, okay, I want to sleep with somebody who's got a disability.
Yeah.
And I've definitely unfortunately met people out there who are disabled friends of mine who are in wheelchairs and stuff, and they're like, yeah, that happens. Like, I've definitely been with people that are like, yes, fantastic. Now I've slept with a disabled person, I don't have to do that again. And I'm like, what is that? What is that entire mindset?
It's bizarre.
It is mind blowing. It is absolutely mind blowing.
Yeah.
But then maybe Rue, we're just too woke. Maybe that's what it is.
Maybe.
We actually have basic respect for human beings.
What a concept, eh?
I know. Who'd have thunk it, right? Jesus, wow. Okay, so in regards to like sex education as a disabled person, what would you say to people that have either just discovered the fact they've got a disability or have become disabled through some kind of accident or what have you? Is there anything that you would like to say to those people? I'm not even going to influence or sway that. I'm just going to openly leave that as an open question for you to answer however you will.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've got a few things. The first thing I would say is if you found out that you're disabled and you're coming to terms with it or you're wanting to accept it, if you use social media, the first thing I would do is to follow disabled accounts. I'm not saying that as a plug because there's many disabled people that are online who post wonderful things. And I think online social media is about curating your own experience, and doing that by diversifying your feed and by having posts coming up from people that are experiencing similar things can just be so unifying. And the online disabled community is absolutely fantastic. I think they will have your back through like thick and thin, and that's one of the main support systems for me, is meeting people online in the disabled community. I think the other thing is that mobility aids are not a hindrance. They're not a bad thing, and often we're taught that they are. But mobility aids, whether it's walking stick, whether it's even a pair of glasses, whether it's a wheelchair, anything like that, all of those things are there to give you your freedom, and they're wonderful. And I would also recommend getting jazzy, dressing them up, like nice ones with fairy lights, and styling them to your outfits, because that just makes it a lot easier. I think the last thing that I would say is just that you are not a burden, and you deserve to be able to access the world that everyone else can access. And I think that's something that we're all still fighting for, but you deserve that, whether it's not there or not yet. So yeah, that's what I would say. I think
one of the most poignant things, I talked about this a little while ago, one of the most poignant things that has ever been said to me by somebody with a disability was, it's not my disability that makes me disabled, it's the rest of the world. And I was like, I never even considered that. It's society and the way that we treat disabled people that make them disabled, not their disability, which is mind-melting when you think about it. I'm also going to take this. Oh no, you go.
No, I was just going to say, because it's like wild to me to think that if everywhere was accessible, the difference in how my life would be, because I would be able to access the world in my own way, and it's baffling to think that. But yeah, just hopefully things improve in the next few years.
We can keep our fingers crossed. And this is actually, I'm going to take this opportunity as a reminder to all of you people, regardless of your disability, your ethnicity, your sexual proclivities, whatever the scenario, this is your opportunity to take a moment to look at your social media feeds and think about whether they're diverse. Think about the people that you follow. Think about whether you need to follow some more disabled creators, some more ethnically diverse creators, because that was another thing to me that was like, I wasn't aware of how single dynamicked my my actual social media feed was until it was pointed out to me, and I was like, oh my god, I don't follow enough disabled creators. I don't follow enough ethnically diverse creators. I need to really go out of my way to find people that gel with me, because there's plenty of people out there, do you know what I mean, that gel with me on levels that I really identify with, that do provide me with some diversity, that means that I can learn more about different cultures and different people's lifestyles and different people's perspectives on life and experiences of life. So Here's your reminder, friends. Here's your reminder. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Rue, for coming and joining me. I really, really appreciate it, and coming and talking and having this conversation and being so open with me. Where can people find you?
Thank you so much for having me. I've had the loveliest time. Thanks for everyone to listening to me as well. Just ramble on because I do love talking about these things. I am on. My handle is RollWithRu. You can find me on Twitch, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. And yeah, I post pretty much sort of similar stuff to what we've been talking about today. With occasionally pictures of my cat and my dog. So
Yay! We love pets. Pets are great. I've just got some crabs, and they're ridiculous. They're just so ridiculous. I'm also going to take this opportunity to let everyone know that I will be posting, if you're wanting to follow Rue, I will also be putting it down in the description of this YouTube video, or if you're listening to the podcast, I'll be putting it down in the description for that as well, so that it's all very easy to find Rue. Please go and give them a follow, because they're glorious, and they talk about all the kind of stuff that I love and appreciate, So, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.